And it's a real honor to welcome our guest speakers today, and I'll give your introductions about them right now. So first we have Frances Mallari, who is a fifth-year PhD student at George Washington University's clinical psychology program. Her research focuses on identifying and measuring mediators and moderators that precipitate the existential crisis to which no one is immune, loneliness. She works as a psychotherapist, specializing in young adults who present with mood and anxiety disorders. She is passionate about issues that affect communities of color and is constantly searching for ways that education, research, and therapy can address those issues. And now we have Aubrey Harrison, who is a fourth-year PhD student at GW's clinical psychology program as well. His research focuses on racial discrimination, community violence exposure, temperament, and desensitization among African American adolescents. He also works as a psychotherapist, specializing in family and adolescent therapy, and he is most passionate about working with African American adolescent males and providing mentorship to those who struggle to find their voice in society. So please join me giving a warm welcome to Frances and Aubrey. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having us. I think we rarely get platforms like this to talk about issues that impact students of color, so we're very grateful to be here. So I wanted to start by saying I've been a person of color my entire life. That was something I wanted to try to put in my introduction. And I wanted to start by saying Aubrey and I really wanted this to be an open dialogue, so an open conversation. We didn't want to have to present or have a lecture. I remember asking Shawn, do we have to make PowerPoints? Is that something we have to do? So we definitely have topics we want to cover in our talk, but please feel free to jump in and talk, and especially if you have an experience to share or anything like that. We wanted to start by just giving some background about us. So I was born in the Philippines, and I lived there only for a few months before my family moved to Oman. And Oman is one of the lesser known countries, so just the briefest of geographic lessons. It's west of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, so it's an Arab country, and obviously that means that the major religion there is Islam. So virtually every Omani person is Muslim. So growing up, the way that I understood how society was categorized was along religious lines. And it wasn't until my family immigrated to the States that I saw society being categorized by racial lines, and then within those categories, understanding that there was a hierarchy there. And I think my experience with understanding race as a construct, which is one that I think is actually common for a lot of women of color, was seeing standards of beauty and which features were being praised as desirable and which features were being praised as attractive. And so before I even knew what words to put to race, it was very much understanding that this was like a social construct kind of a thing. And I remember Aubrey and I talk about like what would be the simplest equation to explain the construct of whiteness, and something that I've seen and have really lived is just that whiteness equals power in a lot of ways, and equals power in the domain of physical attractiveness. We see it in politics, we see it in education, we see it in policy, and in just virtually every space. And so my family recently got its citizenship. So this past election was the first one we could vote in, and it was a horror for us. So that was just sort of the context that I wanted to bring in as far as my background goes.
For me, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, South Shore. Someone knows it. And I'm often coined in my neighborhood as one of the few that made it out. And so whenever I go back to that neighborhood, one of the things that Frances and I always discuss is code switching. And so code switching, with the explanatory comma, that's something that we use, is when you have to navigate two different voices. And so one of the quotes that we highlighted that actually Dave Chappelle used was, for black people, we speak two different vernaculars. One is basically the hood speak, street vernacular, and the other one is energy vernacular. So that vernacular always has to play a role for me in so many different spaces, but especially when I leave my hood. And so whenever I go back to that neighborhood, whenever I go back to Chicago, whenever people hear that I'm from Chicago, it's like, wow, you didn't get shot? Did you ever were you ever in a gang? How's the violence there? Oh man, it's interesting to see a black man in psychology, right? Something that is not often seen. And so, especially when I hear that I'm pursuing my PhD, that's like, I'm the unicorn, right? That is rare and few and far between. And so, whenever I go back to my neighborhood, I see people who often are much older than me, who are still hanging on the same block, doing the same things that they were doing, but they talk to me and say, wow, I can't believe that you've gone so far, and I look up to you. It's amazing to see that you're doing what you're doing, and just keep pursuing that. And so that's my background, because I always have to keep that identity, which is my Chicago Southside identity, which plays a role in why I'm in this field.
And definitely a great segue from Aubrey's background, and something we talk a lot about is this idea of white space and black space. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with these concepts. So this was an idea coined by the Yale sociologist Elijah Anderson. And so he said that there's this idea that white space is exactly what Aubrey described. So places that are overwhelmingly white, so predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and areas where people of color get sort of informal messages that these places are off limits. And so like, what is white space? All of education. So public and private is white space. Movie theaters, country clubs, cafes, restaurants, malls. So these are all white space.
APA.
This room. Sweet. Right. So it's just basically places that are overwhelmingly white. And so when you enter this space, it is on us to prove that we belong there. So a lot of the burden is on people of color to prove that we belong in a white space. And as Aubrey's background illustrates, so the converse of that is black space. And that Elijah Anderson describes as being, for lack of more eloquent words, at this heart level connected to the idea of the ghetto. And we can really see this. And I remember we were together when we were watching the second presidential debate. And if you remember, there was this well-dressed black man who asked President Trump, how does he feel with all the division and with all the rancor surrounding this election that he can be a president of all people, a president of the people? And if you recall, his response included this rant about the inner cities, and the person didn't even ask about that. That wasn't part of the question, and that his instinctive response included the inner cities shows how deep this connection and this assumption that black equals ghetto equals black space is. And what's hard with that is that white people never really have to enter black space. You don't have to go into communities of color, but we do. We have to navigate white space literally as a condition of our existence. So in order to succeed, in order to be educated, in order to figure out how to leave places that people of color typically occupy, we have to figure out how to navigate those spaces.
Yeah. And I mean, I think with that, it's always important to highlight our experiences, right? And so something that we talked about again was just, when was the first time we realized that we were navigating white space, right? What was that experience like? For me, I can remember that was when I was 6 years old. I remember giving a store clerk money for a hot dog. And the store clerk, I didn't have my money out. The store clerk said, I need to see your money. I need to see what you have. Instead of allowing me to pull it out of my pocket. And so the assumption was that I was going to steal, you know. So I went back and told my mom that. She was irate. She went back to that store clerk and said, don't you ever do that to my son. My son was given money, don't assume that this black child, this young black male, is going to steal. And that was that assumption. And so I remember that so vividly because that was my first experience. And then continuing navigating life, those experiences began to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. One of my other experiences as I became kind of in the field of psychology, as I explored that, I remember being at a conference. It wasn't APA actually, but it's a conference that I think it was my first conference. And I remember looking around and saying, wow, I'm really like the only black person here. What is this going to be like right now? But then I saw a couple other black men. And that was my moment, like, let me go speak to them. I don't know you, but let me go speak to you because this is my solidarity. So it was maybe about 5 of us, and one of them was a psychologist. So he's standing there, and as we are all standing there conversing, he stops us and says, we have to be mindful of what's happening right now, and we might need to disperse because they're looking at us right now. There are too many black men congregating in this space.
So exactly what that is, it's managing your blackness to be more palatable to white people or to people who are not of color. So, but on a greater level, like there are times where I felt you had to like manage that for literal self-preservation. Like we're literally talking about life or death sometimes. So just, and I think, you know, we talk about W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of double consciousness. So there's this idea that there is a way that I see myself, but I'm also knowledgeable of the way that others see me, and to what extent is there overlap between those two perceptions, and to what extent do I believe or buy in or internalize the latter part. And I think that's where it can get painful. I think that's where it can get painful, knowing that I don't know that I see myself as a threat, but I know other people see me as a threat, and am I a threat? You know, it's that.
Yeah. Very real. Yeah. And I think one of our other points was, you know, these are issues that always impact people of color. And so, as a black man, this is something that I have always thought about since I was young. You know, how do I navigate white spaces, and what are the different experiences that are going to happen to me? Racial socialization, that's something that is huge, like coming up in the field right now. And with racial socialization, how did my parents teach me about race? What was racial pride? You know, prep for bias, and also promotion of mistrust. Those 3 different things. You know, preparation for bias is really preparing you for an encounter with a police officer, or for racial discrimination, preparing you for those instances. So if I just got my license, my mom had to say to me, be careful, make sure you put your hands on the steering wheel, put your hands out of the car because you don't want anything to happen to you. And I think with that, one of our things is, in order to get white people to care about issues that really impact communities of color, we feel that, you know, we have to appeal to people's basic humanity.
Which I find incredible, that is something that we have to do, that people have to be shocked into caring about these issues. And if it's okay with the families, I think people should be able to see those police videos. But I remember thinking that that's what it takes for people. And then, and you know, I get angry with this because then immediately after I feel like our pain gets politicized, immediately after. So it's not even like there's this moment where I can just like feel it. It's immediately an investigation into it. And so I remember we were watching the results of the election, and there, you know, there's this point where it feels incredulous to us, and I remember being really grateful that I would not have to explain this to children. I remember thinking that we don't have kids who we have to explain what this means and what this is like. And to Aubrey's point about racial pride and talking about, that's something we talk about a lot, is you know, how does education even teach about race and racism? How do we even do that? And we talk about sort of the race pool and the racism pool. And so the race pool is full of Black achievement and Black role models and TV shows and books that have diversity and
Filipino achievement.
Right,
and pride, right.
And
yeah.
Kwanzaa.
Right.
And like the racism pool has slavery and Jim Crow and police brutality and you know, we say that, like, I think we would want our kids to just like swim in the race pool,
Right.
but like the racism pool is locked and drained and we run past it. And I know that's not the way to teach about it too, but it's hard because I think it can be, you know, when you talk about issues that impact communities of color, you want to focus on areas where we need help and where there's distress, but that's not the whole picture. And so much of our glory is in our achievement, I think, can get the backseat.
Right.
Because of all the problems.
Because of all, so another topic or point that we definitely felt was important to talk about was the election, and we kind of touched on that, right? But when we think about APA, when we think about being psychologists, when we think about the training that we have, right? Our role is to impact communities, to impact others, right? And that has a basic human component to it. You know, we are literally working with people to help them get better. And that happens through research, through therapy, our clinical work, through interventions that we might do in communities. But when it came to APA, with our role that we have, there wasn't a statement released about all the pain that all of these communities of color were actually experiencing. And so
we waited for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the worst feelings is waiting for something that never comes.
Mm-hmm.
And we were thinking about how, you know, with the Hoffman report, you know, that was so messed up. And we were clearly on the wrong side of history with that. And I understand, you know, wanting to understand someone who voted for Trump and the reasons behind that, but I think that you can't ignore that at the center of America's political system is race, and that hate crimes increased post-election, and that Trump built a campaign on racism and sexism and xenophobia and Islamophobia, and that there wasn't any sort of official statement from the American Psychological Association acknowledging what this might do to vulnerable populations was a travesty for students of color. And if that sounds like an indictment, it is.
Hear, hear.
And I think that the basic feeling for us immediately after the election was we still have to go into these spaces, right? I still have to
teach
do therapy.
right after. We had to do
Right.
therapy right after that election.
So who's checking on us? And then who's checking on our clients? Who's checking in with all of those individuals who are being affected in all these different ways? And so for us who, you know, who look up to APA, who look up to this kind of organization that is built for psychologists, it was like,
if you are neutral
Right.
in issues of oppression, you're on the side of the oppressor,
Right. Yeah.
is how we felt.
That's how we felt, yeah. And so I think that's what was so important for us is that, and we'll get into our recommendations later, you know, that there has to be something to be said as individuals who are working for others, right? Something we talked about that was huge, Lyft came out with a statement. That's a ride sharing
It's a
company.
car service.
Right. You know, they're just picking people up, but they came out with a statement just to make sure that their patrons felt better about riding with the drivers, right? Something so simple. Organizations that have nothing to do with, you know, helping others in a way that we do, that healing role that we have, they came out with statements, but our role was not there.
And I think just the myriad of ways we could have addressed this, one of the most basic things Trump did, you know, that was appalling was that he appealed to people's fear. and a really, really primal fear of othering people. And when you're afraid, you can justify any action that you can take. When people can justify shooting someone in cold blood if it was out of a place of fear. And this was just a way to address just like the myth of Black criminality and how he did that. And there wasn't any addressing of that. I remember telling Shawn, is this going to be less a panel and more a reckoning because we're mad about stuff, and we're going to express it. And we were waiting for a statement, for something. And again, you know, I understand wanting to appeal to a broad audience, but it felt like a real missed opportunity. And so I did my past clinical externship at this affluent private practice in DuPont Circle. And I remember being shocked that so many of my clients didn't bring up the election after. And I remember thinking that's what privilege is, that for us, the politics have always been personal. They have always been personal. And for politics to be a hobby horse or something you go on the comment section on Facebook about is not so many people's lived reality is. But I also work at a community mental health center. And so these were clients who were affected by DACA, so like deferred action for childhood arrivals, and this was real for them. And that was like, okay, like this is not just a topic of conversation for people.
So I think something that we thought was very important was just to have some recommendations for all of us in this room, but as you hear these recommendations, taking them to the next person that you may see. And so our first one was, we don't let anything go.
Nothing. We don't let anything go.
Nothing, because the stakes are too high. For those individuals that we are serving, for us as students of color, for those who are psychologists of color, to have you not say something about what you're seeing, what you've heard, what you're experiencing, is that side of the oppression.
You have to tell the story. Club.
So there was one time where we were all hanging out with friends, and I'm always the side of like calling things out, but in a way that is more of my clinical therapy. Like, let's talk about this right now.
You're calmer than
right.
with it.
So you know, I remember there was a certain song on, and as the song is playing, there's this white guy that's standing next to me. He's like rapping the lyrics with me, and we're like, you know,
we're all singing.
And I don't know this guy either. You know, he's just like, okay, let's do this. Cool. Then he says the N-word, and as he says it, I go, whoa.
Literally, so we are in the club, it is dark, music is playing, the guy says the N-word, and I see, like, Aubrey be like, this is a teachable moment. this is an opportunity to educate.
Right.
It takes him away.
I took her to the side, and I was like,
oh my God.
You can buy me a shot, and we'll talk about this right now.
Like,
because
we are going to unpack why that is problematic.
Moment. You know, I couldn't let that go. I couldn't let him get away with that because it happens so often. You hear it, you see it, and it's let go, and then it continues to happen.
Right.
And so that moment, his experience, I believe, and I hope, was one where he was like, wow, this black man is actually pretty cool, and like, wasn't gonna punch me, which might have thought he might do, but he actually talked to me about this. And now I can actually take this to the next person.
We don't let anything go. I dated this white guy who said to me, you know, I actually don't think of us as being in an interracial relationship, as though that were a compliment. And I was like, we're gonna have to talk about this because this is central to my identity, being a person of color.
Right.
Right. So I think it's just, I think what's important that we often struggle with and grapple with too is that, you know, we understand that there is a rift that can be wide and deep between intentions and impact. So we know that sometimes people don't have the intention to be offensive and the intention to be racist or prejudiced, but it still can have the effect of being that way. And so we recognize that we're still going to call you out on it, and we're going to tell you why, like, that is an issue. We don't let anything go.
We don't let it go.
We don't let it go.
Gonna do number 2.
Yeah, so something that we thought was interesting, I'm going into my 5th year in my doctoral program, and Aubrey's going into our 4th year, is that the APA has guidelines on multicultural education and research and therapy. You all need to have requirements. You all need to do better with that. You can virtually go through an entire training program without having interacted once with a person of color or with a person who differs from you in any socio-demographic characteristic. We have to seek out these experiences, and we seek them out willingly and personally and openly, but I think there are people who wouldn't. And so it's like, if we're gonna be ethical therapists, you need to work with people different from you. And we'll admit we don't know how to operationalize what those requirements will look like, but we know they need to exist. So.
Yeah. My third one is, we know privilege has a generally negative connotation, but it's not about making white people feel guilty. It's more so about us coming together and teaching and working to make sure that everyone in the room feels accepted, right? And so if I don't feel accepted in this room, and you don't feel accepted in this room, it's not okay, right? But if I don't feel accepted and you don't know that, I need to let you know, and we need to talk about this and work together to figure out how we're going to move forward, right?
And it's this weird feeling when we talk about white privilege, when the person we're talking to feels guilty, because it's like, I missed the jump where you like skillfully made this about you. Like, I don't know how you were able to just like perverse this and now I feel bad because you feel bad, and I don't know how to manage both of our emotions like in the room, and it's not about you because it's always been about you. So recognizing white privilege is knowing that there are things you don't even have to think about, that you don't even have to be aware of, and you can enter spaces we can't. And so, give us a seat at the table. This is awesome. Like, we wouldn't have been able to organize something like this or have an audience. So, like, thank you for doing that. This is like theory and practice.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's important to also just kind of highlight is that as students of color, we often are navigating these spaces, and so we want advisors, professors, supervisors who are open to talking about this with us. There have been several instances where I was like, my Black experience cannot be brought up right now because I don't think you can handle it.
Because it's not professional.
Right, it's not professional. My vernacular, my street vernacular that I talk, I've actually had people say, you need to change your language, that's not okay. And for me, that is a core part of who I am. I have to be able to go back to those communities that I work with and speak that way, because that's how we connect, right? And so if you're shunning that part of me, if I have to compartmentalize that, then that is that way of saying, that is not accepted here. And that's often how people of color may feel in those environments. And so we have to make sure that we are creating an open environment for that.
And with that compartmentalization, it goes back to that idea of double consciousness. How can I have this unified identity where I see myself as this holistic person when there are parts of me that are so fragmented and parts of me that are deemed more attractive when they're not native to me. And I think what scares us is that we see, in this post-election climate, that the cancer of racism has so many permutations and just does not seem to remit in its ability to expand. So this is just a conversation that has to continue and continue.
And with that, kind of the next recommendation was ours, that if people of color approach you and say that they've experienced racism, you don't get to decide that they didn't, right?
No, yes.
You can't do that. You know, there have been conversations that I've had where I was talking about an experience that I had and was like, but are you sure?
Are you sure that was, are
Right.
you sure they meant that?
But it felt that way for me.
Right.
And so it was still real because of past experiences that I've had. And so making sure that you are open to that, and again, that you accept that that was an experience. Something that we've also talked about when we talk about like the police brutality, all the videos that we've seen in the media, there is always a but. But was he doing something wrong? But did he reach? But did he have something on him? But was he in the right place at the right time? But was she supposed to be there? All of those buts negate the experience that actually happened, right? And so we have to make sure that if we say it was racism for us, it was racist. And that was a real experience for us.
The objective reality is that no one who is white in America will know what it's like to be a person of color in America. That's just the objective reality. I dare you to fight me on that one. Not gonna happen. So I think just a lot of competence, a lot of being competent, working with people of color, and being conscious of that really just starts with awareness. So just recognizing that there are gaps in your perspectives, there are blind spots, and from that awareness, I think can come exposure and can come knowledge, and then hopefully skills and something that's concrete. How do we turn guidelines into requirements? How do we, I think about what it means to be a humanistic psychologist, and so it's understanding people of color as just full, complex people. I think we can quickly get into categories, and then, within those categories can get into hierarchies, and I can see that being okay as a starting point, but let's talk about individual experiences and talk about, especially in this climate, what all of that means, and all that baggage. People of color made America, love us.
For real. I think with that, the competence starts with the awareness, right? That goes along with our checking in on your supervisees, your advisees, your students in classes and things like that. Again, when the election happened, which was very devastating for us, I don't remember anybody checking in on us. No one actually came to us and said, "Are you okay?" But you could clearly see it on our faces, because those were moments for us that were like, this hurts. What does this mean for my life? I'm no longer, at that moment for me, it was like, I'm no longer a training clinician. I'm a black man who lives in America who now has to fear even more for his life. And that's what I felt at that moment. So checking in, that's important. Yeah. And our last one, this is one that I think is probably the most important from what we talked about, is it's your duty to continue the dialogue and to educate someone on how to be color competent and color conscious outside of this room. It is your duty. That is a requirement of everyone sitting in this room. And as you continue to talk to people outside of this room, it is your duty. Because when you go to different sessions, try to expose yourself to a session that you would not normally go to one that is talking about different experiences of people of color. That is going to help you expand your mind, expand your world, expand the experiences that you actually have heard of from other people.
And honestly, if we're sort of utilizing a system of injustice and unfairness, it carries more weight coming from white people. When white people call, if you see racism, say racism, and if it's coming from you guys, it unfortunately carries more gravitas than it does, because we get pegged as being angry or like you want to hurt.
Right.
Like
oh,
you-
he pulled the race card.
Right.
Whoa, let's not go there. That's what happens.
Right. So it's when it's white derived, it is more powerful, and it is more likely to change people's minds.
And often, sometimes we are not invited to those tables. We are not present at that table. And so when you all are at those tables and you hear some things that are not right, you have to call it out, because that's what's important.
We're not in attendance.
Right.
We're not there.
We're not in attendance, and it's not, it gets to be a lot to have to do that all the time. So if we have allies who are doing it with us, then it makes it a little bit easier and relieves that burden from us. So with that, we want to open kind of the dialogue and see if you all have any comments or questions.
I'd just like to thank you for your statement about how troubling it was that there was no statement from the APA. And the reason I say that, and we have some board members in here from Division 32, and quite frequently the topic of making a statement has come up. I know Shawn's championing a number of them, and there's been resistance. There's people who say, oh, it doesn't matter, we can't make statements of, all the time on every topic. But your point that how important it is on this particular topic, and the fact that these statements didn't come out, I hope the incoming board members, remember that, because there was talk of statements and they were basically obstructed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it means something, and I hope the future board members remember this presentation.
Yeah, that was definitely something that really hurt us. And I remember Googling like just every permutation of like APA official statement on election, post-election statement, and just waiting and nothing came. And I remember thinking, well, maybe part of the rationale is that you want to be able to understand other people's perspectives, but it felt like what was lost was greater than what was being preserved. And this wasn't like just any topic. This was the federal election, so there was that feel of we just got the shaft.
Right. And who's sticking up for us? Especially as training clinicians and people of color who are trying to make it in this field. If we don't have people who are sticking up for us, an organization that we have looked up to for a long time.
Or I think I even would want to have read maybe like a conflicted statement,
Right.
or sort of like on the one hand this, but on the other hand that,
Right.
but there was nothing, so there was no addressing of it at all.
And that, in and of itself, is white privilege, right? Say nothing.
I know working for GW at the health center, we sent out a tweet, we sent out a post, and we actually got in trouble by the university because we were separating out other people that might be struggling too. And we said,
That's what's up.
we don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
This is really what's occurring, and this is what needs to happen, and they need every student of color at this university that is a primarily white institution
Yeah.
needs to know that they have a safe space to come.
Right.
We address.
Go ahead.
We address. No, you go ahead.
So ingrained. So ingrained.
I know.
Right.
Just,
Yeah.
I just want to say how moved I am by your presentation. Like, so much of what you said, really resonated. And I noticed when you were talking about white spaces that, Division 32 for me has been a safe space in lots of different ways. And yet when I came in and I saw you, Francis, my immediate thing was, oh, there's another Asian woman in the room this year.
That's what's up. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I hadn't intended on staying for this. I didn't know what you guys were going to talk about, but because you said that you felt nervous just before you started, and Lisa said to me, Tracy said to me, are you staying for this? And I said, yeah, because she said she was feeling nervous. I want to show some solidarity.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And that negotiating that, being bilingual in the spaces, you know, I'm so familiar with and so, you know, aware of on one level, and yet it's so ingrained, I defer to the white man to say, you go first.
I know, I love that. I love that Shawn asked me to be a part of this, because I remember telling Aubrey that so much of the dialogue on race relations in the States is about black and whites, when there's so many other racial and ethnic categories, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, various others, and then, you know, even just intersectionality, so being of a racial ethnic minority, and then being a woman. I love that. And like Aubrey being black, like who is the most hated person in America? The black male.
Right.
Not anymore.
Amongst certain subsects.
Certain,
Right, yeah, so there's
Yeah. I mean, even if we look around in this room, I'm the only black man in this room. When I walk around APA, I'm the only black man usually walking down those halls. And it gets difficult at times, because it's like, I have to navigate and always be on my toes.
There was a moment when you were talking earlier about, you know, vernacular, and I was like, there's a part of me that really wanted you to bring your South Side to.
oh, he gets so wood.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the thing. I think it's like you just said, it's so ingrained that I put it on when I'm in these spaces, because I've been taught that if I, you know, kind of sit here and go, okay, y'all, I need y'all to kind of sit here, listen to me right now. I'm going to talk to you about the South Side, my hood that I love. I'm a black brother who is all about hip hop, you know, R&B, soul food, all that stuff. And I tell you about that, that is like deviating from the norm for me, you know, and that is a part of me. I will always be the brother who will talk about, you know, the experiences that I've had in the hood, you know, seeing people on the street corner, dapping people up all the time, saying, hey brother, I see you, we got this right now, all right? I'm looking out for you, I love you, I know you're struggling, but I'm always working for you. And they know that in my hood, but when I come here, I have to be like, all right, so, you know, code switch real quick, right? And I just want to let you all know that I'm here and I'm talking about being color conscious, and, you know, but that is a part of this community, this nature that almost always has to happen.
So what you were saying about your last point about allyship and speaking up, the other thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that it gets exhausting.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
exhausting
It's
to always have to say, because it's like you have this policy, I do too, just if you see something, say something. So it's exhausting when it happens, you know, 4 or 5 times a day. Every time you go out in public, something happens and you call it out.
Right.
And it's wonderful when somebody else steps in and says, hey, you know what, that was not okay.
Like shoulder
And
some of the
so
burden.
Right.
It kind of gives you
Yeah.
that sense of relief to be able to just say, this is one battle that I don't have to fight because somebody else stepped in.
Exactly.
And that's so vital
Mhm.
to being an effective ally, is really being willing to step in and take those blows so that we don't have to absorb it.
There's this great research article, I think the primary author on it, I think his surname was Geronimo, and he talked about weathering, like just this like constant like psychological degradation on people of color, where it just takes a toll on you, and like at the end of the day it's like, oh, nothing especially notably negative happened, but I'm really tired, like I'm just having a really bad day, and it's like, oh, because I'm a person of color.
Right, exactly. Now, I always think of John Henry, and like how, I don't know if many of you all know about John Henry, but how, you know, he was this big black man who was working on the railroad, and he was literally building the road. And there was a steam machine built, and because he felt like, okay, I don't want this machine to overtake my role and who I am, I have to work 10 times as hard as this machine. So he did that, and he beat the machine, but when he beat the machine, he died. And so that, carrying that burden all the time, working so hard every day to make sure that this voice is constantly heard and that people see that this is not okay, that gets tiring. I look at some of the black men that have literally passed over the past 2 years, who have been 40, 42, 43, 45, and these are men who have been in huge roles in like the media and stuff like that. But I imagine it's because of the toll and the burden that they have to carry so much with everything that has gone on, plus health and all those other things. Any other questions?
Kevin, you were going to speak.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that the program I work in, doctoral program, Michigan School of Professional Psychology, has a fair amount of color in it. And when the school officially addressed the election the next day, there were some uncomfortable others in that, and they, they let their voices be known. But so it is. But I'd rather have it be that way than the other
Exactly.
way. But I think as psychologists, our job is really to be the most artful in healing these wounds and being able to articulate something without being aware of trying to be aware of everyone's consciousness,
Right.
because the ultimate goal, I think, is to heal this wound, but it can't be done by being silent.
But I think that comes with us being authentic, right? Our authentic self. And so if I'm, as a clinician, coming into a room and I'm hiding my identity, I mean, I really can't hide that I'm a black man. But, but if I'm trying to hide certain parts of me to ensure that in this space, I'm just catering to you, I don't think that our clients feel like there's comfort in there, right? Because they don't feel like I'm being authentic, and so why should my client be authentic? And I think that plays a role in advisees, in supervisees, and students, because for us, sometimes it's like, I can't be my authentic self. I can't code switch and be like, yeah, hey, how y'all doing?
Because your authentic self isn't valued.
Right, it's not valued and it's not accepted in this environment. And so we have to create a culture where that is accepted, right? And so everyone can feel like, okay, I can be my true self and I can talk about some of the pains that I've experienced and maybe what happened yesterday, the microaggression that I experienced yesterday, and I wanted someone to talk to about that. And I know I can go to Shawn, I know I can go to Francis, I know I can go to several different people who are going to be there for me and not feel like I kind of have to seek it out in a moment,
Or rationalize it away.
Right, or rationalize
Tell
it
you
away.
it's not a microaggression.
Right, tell you it's not a microaggression, just tuck it away,
Yeah.
into this invisible backpack that gets
That I carry every day.
every day.
Of my
Right.
life.
Yeah.
There's something else you said as well about kind of, as clinicians, to go out and seek out an experience of working with different.
Right.
Is that the reality for us is that 90% of my clients are going to be different. But also, I'm very aware of that difference. I don't know whether they're aware of
Right. And that's the thing,
Yeah.
the guy saying, I don't think of us as being in an interracial relationship. Like, what?
That'll be why he's an ex now, right?
That's a good one.
But yeah, it's difficult, that I think that role is always difficult because we're always trying to prove ourselves
Right.
in all different spaces, and so.
But I make it kind of, I bring it into the room
Right.
with
Yeah.
my clients.
And you should.
It's important.
Right.
It's important to, going back to being authentic, is I can't hide my Chineseness,
Right.
plus the English accent. That confuses them even more. So it's,
What are you?
and I live in Ohio. I get that a lot. Maybe the worst thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I have trouble reconciling the thought process behind not making a statement that you're talking about, because so the rationale that you're speaking to for not making a statement is to be considerate of those who have the other perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't see making a statement towards the reactions of those who are negatively impacted as invalidating of the positive reaction to begin with. I know, like, that's an assumption that's being made anyway, and I don't really understand why those who just had their worldview confirmed are those that we're concerned about in that moment anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
So I'm like, what is up, APA?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. But again, that's privilege, right? That's
Privilege, it's fragility,
right.
it's like we don't wanna like ruffle
Ruffle
the
the
feathers of
feathers.
the majority of the organization.
Right.
And we're a political organization, and so, or we're an apolitical organization,
Right.
so if we speak to political issues, then we become, and it's to me, a bunch of crap.
Right.
exactly, because we just kept going back to mental health
Right.
and just mental health outcomes. So,
Right.
But there's a way of addressing those issues without being political, saying we understand that the impact, the
Right.
implications are significant for those marginalized individuals and communities.
it could have been an ad libs
Right.
form,
Right.
which is, yeah.
Has APA been called out in some way on this? I mean, I'm not, don't have my finger on the pulse of the beast.
Not that we
Not
know.
that-
I feel like
not
we're
from
the
my
ones that have.
research.
Oh, okay, so there's an opening session tonight with about 3,000 or 4,000 people.
You up for it?
And there usually is some sort of open mic possibility. Even if there's not, this is an opportunity.
Let's get some wine.
We have wine. We have wine.
I'm hearing you say that this is an opportunity for you.
No, that's not what I mean. This is an opportunity for us.
Are you gonna stand up and say something?
It wasn't on my agenda to go to that.
But
Meeting?
you're suggesting it, but what I'm saying is, in this process, what I'm seeing is, this is an opportunity for us.
Us. I mean us. Us.
So who's gonna step up?
Well, that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
I'm bringing it up.
We'll send the mic over to you then.
That's right.
Okay. Certainly, if I'm there,
serious right now.
if I'm there, but I don't have 100% control over my
Right.
time.
Well, and
I have a partner who I have to work things out with, and we've got commitments to people who live in this town. So there's things I can't do because of that. Well, I choose not to do. I choose to honor certain commitments than others, but I'd like to be open for other people who maybe don't have the same strictures.
Oh, I think that speaks, Kevin, I love you, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and just speak to it. That I think that speaks to the fact that it's only, I'll do it as long as it doesn't cost me.
Right.
I'll do it as long as I don't have a price to pay for it.
Right.
But you can do it.
Right.
And so the burden again gets put back on the people of color. They're like, well, fine, we'll go up and speak for it.
Right.
And then suddenly the
It's
race card is
always
being
right.
flown.
Right.
We get, told that we're aggressive or we need to watch our tone or whatever. And so it's like when the opportunity is there, we need people to speak up and
Right.
say it. Like, I will take the blow and I will deal with the consequences because I believe in this.
Yeah.
But I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we are, but you would find allies here. I would go with you, I'm sure Rich would go, people would.
No,
Yeah, Rick, we could
I
address.
understand.
I'm on council.
We
We have a meeting on Friday. What do you want me to say? Seriously.
I would,
And we have
yeah.
tributes.
I would love it.
Let's talk about what needs to be said, and I seriously will
Yeah.
raise the issue.
And I would love to publish as is your presentation on a reckoning
Yes.
with APA.
Oh,
And invite you to join one of our committees. We have a hate crimes task force committee that was started after Trump won.
Hate crimes.
Yeah, and to craft such a statement.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
to advocate for it.
Yeah.
So I know, thank you so much for an incredible presentation.